It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. And hundreds of mourners have gathered for the funeral of one of the Southport attack victims, 9-year-old Alice Da Silva Aguiar. Her family have released a photograph of the little girl taken on the day that she was killed. The government says it wants young people to learn how to spot the conspiracy theories that help drive some of the violence seen following that attack. And Ukrainian forces are said to have reached more than 30 miles into Russia almost a week after the invasion of the Kursk region. Hello, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half an hour, we're going to see what is making headlines with the associate editor of the Financial Times, Stephen Bush, and the political journalist, Alicia Fitzgerald. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. And we'll start with the Daily Mail. Their headline, "No more rioting in the name of our little girl," as the paper shares the message from the parents of 9-year-old Alice Da Silva Aguiar. The Metro also quotes a tribute from the family. The headline reads, "Dance to Heaven, Little Princess." The Guardian highlights the Archbishop of Canterbury calling the use of Christian imagery during the riots offensive. The Times reports on Labour's new plan to help councils cheaply build 1.5 million new homes in the UK by 2030. The Express leads with a potential strike by junior doctors despite their recent pay increase. The Financial Times carries a poll suggesting that, for the first time, more Americans trust Kamala Harris to run the economy than Donald Trump. And the Daily Star report that tomorrow we're going to have a bit of a heat wave. And a reminder, by scanning the QR code you see on the screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us. Now, as I said, we're joined tonight by Stephen Bush and Alicia Fitzgerald. Thanks, guys, for giving up your Sunday evening. We do greatly appreciate it. Let's start with the front page of the Metro, Stephen. And this is the tribute from the family of the 9-year-old Alice da Silva de Agua.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's the most heartbreaking thing that can happen to any parent, and it's a very touching tribute. And the photo, I think, brings it home afresh just how awful and horrible it is. And also it does give you a sense of, you know, what she was like as a human being, which I think will, of course, for everyone, brings home the very human tragedy. And one of the things I think is very impressive, given what the family are going through, is they've taken the time to make a statement about the riots, calling for no more of them, because I think most of us in a tragedy like that would not be thinking about society as a whole. We'd be, you know, lost in our own grief, and I think it's, you know, truly impressive of the family to have done that.
Yeah, and that's picked up, I guess, on the front of the Daily Mail, wasn't it, Alicia, as well? This another quote from the family that's been given out: "No more rioting in the name of our little girl."
Absolutely, and I think more than anything, it serves as a stark reminder about what actually happened and why these riots happened in the first place. Because clearly, for the past, you know, week and a half, all that we've had to focus on really is the destruction and the violence caused by these riots. But when you actually take it back and you remember just how tragic that incident was, it seems like, sadly, because of the riots, it's become slightly forgotten. So this is just a reminder for everyone that 3 innocent children got murdered that day and just how hideous of a situation that was. And even though what followed ended up being really awful too, this was actually the core of what caused those riots. Yeah,
and it's worth as well, if we can just see the front page of the Metro again, dwelling on that picture. I mean, that picture taken on the day that Alicia died, with the cutout of Taylor Swift. I mean, you can't imagine the pain that family must be going through, having taken that photograph and then having lost their little girl.
No, I mean, and she's 9 years old. It's just, it doesn't get worse than that, as Stephen was saying. I mean, you can only imagine, well, you can't imagine, actually, what the parents are going through, and anyone who lives in the community or knew any of these families. It's just beyond words, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we're going to see another funeral as well very soon. All right, let's move on to a story related to this, or in some ways, sort of tangentially, but still related to this, on the front of the Times. And this is about the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter. Why don't you take us through the reporting of this, Stephen? Because this is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, so the tech industry has its own anti-terrorism organisation, the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, which is effectively their talking shop to talk about how they combat terrorism and radicalisation on their platforms, of which X, or Twitter as it then was, is a founding member. But as this story reports, other members of this organisation are saying, well, look, is this a good look for this organisation? Is it helpful for us as the rest of tech companies? Because one of the roles of this organisation is partly have a thing that talks to government about the problem, which avoids, you know, heavy-handed regulation. It gives them a single place to organise. Is it helpful to have Elon Musk's X when X itself is coming under so much criticism? The Community Security Trust, the United Kingdom's main anti-Semitism fighting force, so it fights anti-Semitism rather than, you know, promulgating it, has said that X is the #1 place now that you can find videos by Hamas, right? And incredible. Which, I mean, yeah, is an astonishing statistic when you consider how influential that website used to be among the political class, not just here, but across most of the world. And I think this is a big challenge for the tech companies, because what they don't want are regulations of the kind that EU is talking about, regulations like our own Online Safety Act. And in order to avoid that, they need to be able to show that they are doing things that seriously tackle the problem voluntarily. And it's very, very hard for all of them to do that when you have not just all of those problems on X, but when you have X's owner himself tweeting continually things that in many ways add to the problems, spread, in some tweets and he himself has undone, has spread false information about this incident. So it's very difficult for the tech companies.
It is, and I suppose the fact that it's the top platform for hosting Hamas videos tells us that this has been going on for a spell. This is not just after these days of violence.
Absolutely, and I think even just being a standard user of the platform, you can tell, you can see it, you go on the feed, and if you compare to what your algorithm would have maybe pushed a couple of years ago, it has a noticeable difference. A lot of content maybe that you don't want to see, a lot of more extreme content on both sides as well seems to be floating to the top, and that is definitely something that has happened in the past year or so. It's definitely got a lot worse, and it's noticeable for everyone. And I mean, even in the past week, I've seen an exodus of people not using the platform anymore. So it's clear now that lots of people do not want to be part of this. They don't think that the good outweighs the bad of using this platform anymore. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the big people actually deal with it, because yes, fine, people can stop using the platform, but does that actually really impact Elon Musk? Does that impact the way in which the platform works? Probably not quite yet.
Well, there's an argument at the moment about advertising, isn't there, and how much they're making from advertising. And on that point about being pushed information, I mean, in the early days of the violence, I was pushed notification from an account that I didn't follow that was quite inflammatory, and, you know, had I been that way inclined, it would have been terrible for me to have received that sort of thing. The algorithm has definitely changed recently, hasn't it? Well,
possibly it has. It's very hard for us to tell, partly because as the number of users on it falls, the algorithm can only serve you what's there and is fresh. But it is a huge problem both for that website and indeed for society as a whole, that algorithms, we see this across the social media space, are primarily designed around getting you to stick around. That may mean that it simply serves you, you know, more videos of Cesc Fabregas assists, but it may mean that it serves you more videos about how, you know, the West is in decline, or how, you know, Vladimir Putin did nothing wrong in invading Ukraine. And it can mean that people get into these ever-radicalised silos, and that is clearly part of what's happened, as we've seen in, you know, excellent reporting of these riots, right, where some people who've maybe, you know, had a very difficult time in lockdown have got into conspiratorial thinking, and now they're, you know, now they're rioting, and some of those people are going to having, you know, done damage to other people's property, scared a lot of people, but also ruining their own lives because they're going to spend considerable time in prison.
With respect to journalists, have you guys stopped choosing it or changed the way you've used it recently?
I mean, I did actually just join Threads a couple of days ago, which I'd kind of resisted doing for a while, just because I feel like we all have so much social media. I was like, you know, avoid having another one. But I do think does seem to be a bit of a trend amongst people who use the platform a lot in maybe actually trying to evaluate, is it worth it? Do we want that now? Are we fueling something bad just for our own kind of personal use, I suppose?
Quick thought, Stephen, if you want to.
I very rarely use it now because so much of the information on it is unreliable, so you might as well just read the paper yourself.
Which was one of the reasons why I had it as a news source, but when you can't trust it, then we're using it for. OK, quick, onto a paper that you can trust, Financial Times. And this story, I mean, we saw a change yesterday. I think it was reported that Kamala Harris was ahead in 3 battleground states, Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And now, an interesting one, that she's now ahead in sentiment about the economy.
Yeah, this is really interesting. This is our long-running poll about sentiment of the economy. Trump has led Biden on this for a very long time. This has been a central cause of anxiety in the Democratic Party. And yes, as you say, this mirrors what we've seen in the other polls of her surging in the battleground states, surging in the head-to-heads. Now, of course, it is August. I know it feels to all of you, you go, oh, God, we've really got all the time till November. Obviously, a lot could change, but it does underscore that the change at the top of the Democratic ticket has changed the mood music around that party, and in a way that is, you know, deeply cheering for everyone connected with the Democratic cause.
Quite unexpectedly as well. Did we expect it to be this much of a change and a bounce?
Well, I don't think many people were ready for just how fast this has happened. I think for a while, lots of people were like, this is Trump's election. I mean, he's definitely going to win. But I think now that Biden has stood down, it's clear in the polls that has shifted drastically. And we know as well that Harris is a lot more popular amongst younger voters as well in America than maybe Biden was. So that will actually play quite a big part in this too. And I also don't want to draw too many parallels between this and the UK election, but it does slightly remind me of how, you know, the Conservatives were trusted for so long with the economy. And then in the last kind of 6 months before the election, we suddenly did see that swing to Labour. So I wonder whether that does maybe represent a bit more of a global shift in the way in which people view our political parties and the political spectrum.
OK, Alicia, Stephen, more from you guys later. Thanks for that for now. All right, so what's still to come? Dozens of businesses given special start-up loans during the pandemic are now at risk of going under. That story also in the FT. We'll discuss that next.
Well, it's a little over 3,500 miles. But before we even get to the start line, we've got about a 500-mile little paddle just to kind of get the boat where it needs to be.
Just to warm yourselves
Just
up.
to warm ourselves up. The record is 30 days. We're looking to break that at, we think, around 27 days if everything goes smoothly.
Basically, my son, when he was 2 years old, became very seriously ill, was having lots of seizures, and was transferred into Great Ormond Street. He was having probably about 100 seizures a day, and after several months of being in Great Ormond Street, they was able to stabilise him and get him home. So from my perspective, it's a way of kind of paying back Great Ormond Street for saving my son's life. Absolutely. I mean, Great Ormond Street is probably the best hospital in the world, and we're really super fortunate to have that here in London. They are currently trying to build the new Children's Cancer Centre, which they need about £300 million to do. So all of the money that we're going to be raising as a part of our expedition will be going towards building that. We've done a number of challenges over the years. Darren especially has been doing this for, what, 15, 20 years now? Yeah, 15 years, yeah. So there's been like jungle marathons, and the last one that we did was rowing across the Pacific, which took us 43 days. And then we kind of figured that maybe we'd done enough. We've sort of raised over £250,000 for charities, and we just suddenly thought, well, what about inflation? We need to maybe do one last escapade, and I'm not quite sure who came up with it, but you know, the Amazon is one of the last kind of, you know, trodden wildernesses out there. So, I mean, obviously physically it's going to be extremely difficult, the environment, the heat, etc. And at the points that you really start to struggle, it's certainly from my perspective, it's very easy to just kind of cast my mind to the reason for it, thinking about Great Ormond Street and the children that are in there. And that kind of drives you forward. So we set off next Wednesday, but it takes us a while to get to where we need to be. So we're looking to kick off the Amazon section of that around about the 1st of September. People can follow us on Instagram, just search for Endurance Limits, and then our Just Giving page, which again, just search for Amazon Road.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. We're joined by Stephen Bush and Alicia Fitzgerald. Guys, thanks so much for staying with us. All right, let's have a look at this story on the front of the Times. Alicia, is this all about the Labour Party's plans to make sure that they can build this 1.5 million homes? It is, that very ambitious target of 1.5 million homes over the length of this Parliament. So this was, I think, probably second in priority for Labour's election pledges, and as part of that, they have said that they will have to compromise a little bit and not just build on what we call the brownfield and greyfield sites. That's either sites that have been developed or built on before, but they will have to expand some of that into what we classify as greenfield sites. And they are saying here that they're going to offer people an incentive to sell up some of their greenfield land so that councils can build and develop on it, and actually give local councils more power with development and house building, which is something we largely saw slightly softened under the last Conservative government. Labour want to give more power to the councils and allow them to actually decide where or where not to build, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, just the term compulsory purchase orders makes me feel slightly nervous about it. I don't know what you think, Stephen. What's your sense of this?
Well, look, this is the thing which is really challenging about planning law in England is that we know that it doesn't incentivise enough building. We know that it does create these problems where, because it's so hard to get planning, the value of your land can go up and down quite a lot, on the so-called hope value. So something like this is welcome in terms of fixing that problem. But what you don't want to do is go too far the other way and then remove any incentive to actually build housing and you end in a situation where you can't make any money from it because, frankly, one of the problems we have is we have too few small home builders anyway. This is, I think the interesting challenge for Labour is, unlike the Conservatives, they're definitely going to be able to pass this on the floor of the House of Commons because they've got a very large majority, and of course, because many Labour MPs represent people who can't get on the housing ladder and desperately want more homes to be built. But the question is are they going to be able to get the right mixture of legislative changes, incentives for house builders, and a big enough role for social housing providers and so on in order to actually deliver this very ambitious target? Because if they can't, everything else in their plan starts to look a little bit shaky, because everything else in their plans is built around getting more economic growth, which is what allows them to avoid some otherwise very painful choices on tax and spend.
I suppose they would say this is just one part of their plans to try and build those homes as well. It's just one plank of it. All right, let's move on quickly. We haven't got loads of time left in this heart. And let's go back to the front page of the Financial Times. And why don't you talk us through this story here, Stephen? It's about startups backed by Sunak's COVID fund face the axe.
Yes, so back when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he had the Future Fund, which was a £1.4 billion portfolio, then invested in a lot of startups and small businesses. The bad news, in the last financial year, it reported a £122 million post-tax loss. Many startups backed by it face the axe. Now, of course, most startups do fail. 80% of startups fail in their first year, so we would expect most of the firms the government has backed not to succeed. But that loss does suggest that something in the design of this fund could have been done better. This, I think, will be one of the big arguments about the last government's legacy. Rachel Reeves, of course, has her COVID fraud recovery fund. That will be one way that the Labour government tries to argue that the Conservatives managed the pandemic and the post-pandemic very badly. And things like this, which are absolutely the essence of what both parties want to do, which is to invest more in the economy, get more British startups. But the argument about why so many of these investments failed, why the BBB has made this loss, this will shape a lot of the policy arguments between government and opposition over the next 4 years.
I suppose it speaks to the decisions that are being made during the pandemic that, while they may have seemed great at the time, there wasn't enough due diligence done, and that's what we've ended up with.
Absolutely, and I don't want to be too unfair because, of course, the pandemic was an extremely unprecedented situation, and there is so much in hindsight that we have discovered that maybe wasn't the right decision and should have been done better. And I mean, we'll hear that a lot through the COVID inquiry that's ongoing at the moment. And, of course, there were some decisions that had to be made in very short periods of time. So, credit where credit's due. And I'm sure this isn't the only kind of crack or maybe slight misspending that we will have uncovered from that time. But, I mean, it was a very difficult task for any chancellor, anyone in government during that pandemic. So hindsight is a very beautiful thing.
It definitely is. All right, we've only got a few seconds left. So let's take a quick look at the front of the Star. 35 degrees tomorrow. They're calling it a heat wave. I've said if it's less than 24 hours, how can it be a heat wave? But what do we think?
I mean, even the thought of 24 hours at 35°C makes me want to hide in an icebox.
It's going to be a scorcher, isn't it?
No, I'm all for the heat, because I think we all complain for so long when it's raining. We say we've had no summer, you can't go outside, it's grey, and then when it's hot, everyone complains and says it's too hot. So, no, I'm here for it. I think it's good.
Part of being British. All right, guys, Stephen, Alicia, thanks so much for that. Well, let's take a look at the full weather forecast. And southern Britain looks mainly fine tomorrow and can expect, as we've said, the highest temperature so far of the year. The north, though, is going to be cooler with thunderstorms. Northwestern Britain will have a wet start with torrential thundery rain that could bring a risk of a localised disruption elsewhere. Mostly fine, but of course it'll be muggy in the south with those temperatures. North-eastern Britain will see showery rain taking over during the morning. Some will be torrential, while the northwest will slowly dry up. There could be some disruption there too. Wales may also see a few showery outbreaks, but it'll be mostly fine elsewhere. The south is going to be hot, 35 degrees, as we've said, 95 degrees Fahrenheit possible. Now, northeastern Britain will see thunderstorms largely clearing during the afternoon, leaving most places fine. The southeast then could see the odd potential thunderstorm as well. Tuesday will be less hot, although still very warm in the southeast. Northern and western Britain will see cloud and outbreaks of rain spreading from the west, with showers following to western Scotland later on. All right, coming up next on Sky News at 11. Hundreds pay their respects at the funeral of Alice da Silva Aguiar, one of 3 little girls killed in the Southport attacks.